Okay, so are you saying that I might need to share the song? Well, I'm just getting on Zoom through the Zoom account. Is that not how I can get on Zoom? Oh, yeah, I don't know what that is off the top because it's just in there. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. Oh, my husband is pointing out who knows what he's doing and I don't. He says the password is 557048. It says meeting ID.
There's the meeting.
And then it says passcode, but that I don't know if that's different than what I know what you're saying, you know. Yeah. So that's Did it get you in? Okay, all right. So what we want to do is practice sharing the song. Can I click out of this? Okay, sorry, I was talking to him. Well, 2 people entered the waiting room. View. I'm gonna view and see who it is. It's Amanda and Lisa Bryant. So do we want to admit Amanda ahead? I think we should, shouldn't we? Because we said she could join at 6:15. Oh, we don't want to record this.
So you should have gotten that message that we are starting the recording. So we'll go ahead and get started with our workshop, our presentation. Rochelle. Oh, you're on mute, Rochelle.
Okay, so we mentioned before that if you have questions to go ahead and put them in the chat, but we'll hold those questions until the end for the Q&A. Following the Q&A, we'll also share just a brief song that a parent has written about embracing her son's journey. So I'm going to go ahead and go with introductions. I'm going to introduce Amanda, and then Christine is going to introduce Dr. Polychronis. So Amanda Darrow holds a master's degree in education and a bachelor's degree in clinical and counseling psychology, both from Westminster College in Salt Lake City. She is passionate about inclusion and social justice. Amanda began her advocacy with her research on the effects of a heteronormative classroom environment on LGBTQ plus students. Before the Utah Pride Center, Amanda worked in higher and elementary education. Amanda works at the Utah Pride Center to make homes more accepting and welcoming for our youth and families, schools, and community spaces more inclusive for all, and to educate the current and future generations about our incredible LGBTQIA+ community.
Thanks, Rochelle. And I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Polychronis. Dr. Shambi Polychronis is a passionate advocate for disability rights and has over 20 years of experience in the field. She has served on multiple grant projects, co-authored several articles, and presented at state and national conferences. Her scholarly interests include post-school outcomes for students, family support services, and teacher education. She advocates for social justice issues, including intersectionality, alternatives to guardianship, full inclusion in school and community environments, eliminating aversive interventions, and meaningful employment. Prior to joining the University of Utah, Dr. Polychronis received Westminster College Gore Excellence in Teaching Award in 2018 and taught courses on the disability rights movement, autism, which is debunking myths and stereotypes, inclusive educational practices, and effective methodologies for individualizing instruction. So we are really grateful to have Amanda and Dr. Polly Cronus here and taking time out of their day for such an important topic in our community. So we will now turn the time over to Amanda and Dr. Polly Cronus.
Thank you both for having us. We are going to start off with a land acknowledgement.
So the University of Utah has a specific land acknowledgement that we'd like to read before presentations wherever we are. So we're going to take just a minute and share that with you. We acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities.
And we below have listed what is used often as the Two-Spirit flag in the LGBTQIA2S plus community, and some photos of individuals who are Two-Spirit. We will jump into a little more about individuals who are Two-Spirit during our gender identity conversation, but we want to ensure that there is recognition for our Two-Spirit individuals as we build on this intersectionality tonight.
So we want to jump into the focus of the presentation. And first, let me say it's so wonderful to see so many familiar names in our attendee group. So big shout out to all of you that I've worked with or known from previous gigs. We just wanted to start with letting you know kind of what to anticipate for this presentation. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on the individual journey that children have, especially in their adolescence, but throughout childhood and into adulthood. By talking about the foundational information and how identity is developed. We want to get into reasons to care. Definitely there's research and statistics, but also quality of life. That's where my research really began, was quality of life outcomes after leaving the school system. And also with resources, we want to share some things with you that you can take away. And before we, one of the things I just wanted to add, and Amanda, I'm sure you might as we go along too, I don't know how many of you know this about me, but I am the parent of a child with a disability who was served all through school on an IEP. I have had a long working relationship with the Utah Parents Center across time, including working with them on my own son's IEP as I navigated the school system. Even though I have a PhD in this area, I recognize how difficult some of the processes are in the school system. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out, that I won't just be talking to you about research and statistics, but also my personal experience as a parent, and now the mother of an adult son who is in college. So we'll get into that a little bit later. So just a little overview of what we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to turn the first part over to Amanda as the expert in the LGBTQ topic for tonight. We'll talk about intersectionality. We've worked together for years at this point in time. We're very comfortable with the intersectionality of our groups and the identities. I often work with her over Pride Center events, and she works with me over topics like today, and tomorrow we're presenting for TASH. So tonight, we want to cover some basic language. And so some of you might be fairly comfortable with this. Some of you might not know the difference, or you haven't been exposed yet. And some of you might have maybe a knee-jerk reaction to some of the language and definitions that we'll be using, but that's part of the process. So we appreciate you spending your time with us and becoming knowledgeable about some of these terms.
Thank you, Dr. Polychronis. All right, so we're going to jump right into talking about different parts here. In part one, we're going to be talking about sex, and we're talking about physical traits, sex assigned at birth. We'll be talking about gender identity, gender expression. We'll be talking about romantic and sexual orientation, and we'll be making sure that you leave here today knowing what LGBTQIA2S+ stands for. Something I really want to highlight is throughout the conversation tonight, we will be using a variation of letters because we take the data and we use what the data is going to say. So some might say LGBTQ+, some might say LGBTQIA+, and some might include the 2S. We keep with the research and what that specific research used. So we'll talk through the letters, you'll learn the letters, and then you'll really understand the letters by the time we get done today. So we're going to jump right in and we're going to start talking about our different identities. And I like to show this image because I am an image. I learn with images. I need to see what exactly you're saying. And, we're going to talk about sex, assigned at birth, again, as I mentioned, gender identity, attraction, expression. And the main thing that I really want you to gauge here, this image was created, this specific image was created by Sam Killerman. You can find it at It's Pronounced Metrosexual. And Sam Killerman created this specific image. He was not the creator of the actual genderbread person, but I like to give credit where credit's due. And this specific image that we're going to use today that I prefer to use is the 4th version. And it's going to break up. The main thing you need to know is that it's going to break up identity, expression, sex, gender, and sexual orientation, explaining to you that these things do not align with each other all the time. They may, your gender identity may match a gender expression or a sex, but they're not equal to, and they don't need to align. So when you look at this, I don't want you to get, a little worried that you may not understand it because we're going to break it all up. I just want you to see the image that I just showed as knowing that these are separate entities that we're going to discuss. And one thing I always like to highlight is that these aren't entities that are just specific to the LGBTQIA+ community. These are identities that all of us hold. So what I mean by that, let's talk about sex, the physical makeup. What is anatomical sex? What are the sex characteristics that we're born with? What is our sex assigned at birth? Well, we've all taken probably some level of biology class. We know probably what being female and being male is, but often being intersex is something that we do not talk about. So just a quick overview of being female: having a vagina, ovaries, 2 X chromosomes, predominant estrogen, and the ability to grow a baby in an abdominal area. Being male is often having testes, a penis, an XY chromosome configuration, predominant testosterone, and the ability to put a baby in a female's abdominal area. But being intersex, I like to use this quote by Interact as someone who is not intersex. I always lift the voices of those who are, and Interact is an organization that lifts the voices of intersex individuals. Intersex is an umbrella term for differences in sex traits or reproductive anatomy. Intersex people are born with these differences or develop them in childhood. There are many possible differences in genitalia, hormones, internal anatomy, or chromosomes compared to the usual 2 ways that human bodies develop. Now, one question that I often get asked is, I've never heard of being intersex. How common is that? And I like to give 2 statistics because I think they're really good numbers. Number 1, it is as common as knowing someone who is genetically redhead. So if you know someone who's genetically redhead, it's likely that you know someone who is intersex. Another statistic, if we look at the global population of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it is equal to the global population of being intersex. So 2 really interesting statistics that I want you to be able to hold while thinking about what it means to be intersex. Now, we just talked about our physical characteristics, what we're assigned at birth. Now we're going to talk about gender identity, and this is who you know yourself to be. So when you know yourself to be what you were assigned at birth, you and it's correlating with your gender identity, you are known as cisgender. For example, I am a cisgender woman. I was assigned female at birth, and I identify as a woman. I am cisgender. Individuals who are transgender is when their sex assigned at birth and gender identity do not correspond in the expected way. So for example, if I was assigned female at birth, but I identified as a man, I could be a transgender man, okay? And it's really important to know that many, but not all, transgender people seek to bring their bodies into alignment with their gender identity. That's called transition. It's really important to know right here that transgender, in order to say that you are transgender, that is the only qualification you need to be transgender. You do not need to go through medical transition. You do not need to, have any kind of hormones, surgery. Your gender expression does not need to change one way or another. If you say my gender identity does not correspond with what I was assigned at birth, I'm transgender. That's what it means to be transgender. Now, under the transgender umbrella, we have these other terms. So as I explain these terms, these individuals may also identify as transgender because they're under the umbrella. So someone who's gender fluid is a gender identity who has a dynamic mix of boy or girl. They might feel more like a boy one day or more like a girl another day. It just may be what, it might not be a day, it might be a month, it might be just a fluidity of their gender identity. Then we have individuals who are third gender and two-spirit. And these are genders that we find in indigenous cultures that are saying there's more than two genders present. So for two-spirit folks, they may explain that they identify as having more masculine and feminine spirits. And then third gender may be, and that's coming out of our indigenous cultures. And then third gender may be coming out of Samoa or more of our Polynesian cultures as having a third gender that's kind of a dynamic mix, kind of like gender fluid. Now, something that's really, really important with these two identities is that you must be part of those cultures to say you take on those identities. Someone who is white is not able to come in and say, I identify as two-spirit. It is a sacred term that is used only by folks who are in those communities. Agender, I like to always talk about the A as meaning no. So, and you'll catch on to that as we continue on this conversation. So agender is someone who has little or no personal connection with gender at all. Genderqueer non-binary is a gender identity label where you just don't fit in with the binary of man and woman. And that can look different for different people. Often folks think that non-binary is like you're right in the middle. You're not male or female or man or woman, you're non-binary, you're just right in the middle. That's not necessarily what it means. It could mean that. It means something different for everyone. This label is very unique because it just means I don't fit in as woman or man, I'm just somewhere else, but it's hard for me to describe it. I'm not within those categories. I'm non-binary. So, try not to think of this as just like you have these three options of gender. It's a very fluid term here as we talk about gender identity, and it's personal. Every single person's gender journey is different. I can't tell you what non-binary will mean to one person and what it will mean to another person. It is an individual identity that you hold and you feel and you understand. So we also know that we form our gender identity around the age of 3 years old. And when I say we form it, it's formed as much by our brains as it is our environment. It's determined by those two factors. And, when you're born into an environment that teaches you that there's only a binary way of thinking, that there is only men and women, boys and girls, and you're assigned one of those identities at birth, you're going to, believe that that is the way that, I'm sorry, my light goes off. I have to roll around over here. You'll see me flapping like a bird in a minute because I've got to turn my light on. Always does it. So for example, if you're in this environment where you are told there's only one way of thinking, okay, and you're not able to express any other way outside of this one way of thinking, there's two things that often happen. You'll come out at a later age as understanding your gender identity to be outside of those binary systems, but you'll also grow up possibly thinking, I'm weird. There's something wrong with me. I'm not like everyone else, because you're told and taught that there's not other ways of thinking, of other ways of feeling. So when we have an environment that has gender creative parenting or gender creative exploration, you start to see gender in a different way, and you may be able to come out at earlier ages. You may be able to live your true authentic self in earlier years. All right. I often talk about pronouns around gender identity, but the number one thing I want to say first before we talk about pronouns are the way we like to be referred by, how we want to be, what we want to be called. And but it's very important to know that there is not a single pronoun that is aligned with a gender identity. So even though I am cisgender and I am identifying as a woman and I use she, her pronouns, I don't have to use she, her pronouns because I'm a cisgender woman. I could use they, them pronouns. If I felt that worked better for me, then I would use those pronouns. But let's jump into those pronouns because you're probably looking at this a little worried. But most of us have heard of he, him pronouns, she, her pronouns. Lately, we've heard the use of they, them pronouns in a singular context. In the middle here, we have ze and they and them pronouns, and these pronouns are called neopronouns. And the neopronouns, meaning new pronouns, are what a lot of individuals are starting to use. And again, these pronouns are because they feel good. When someone refers to someone with a pronoun, it just fits. And we often, don't understand how important a pronoun is until we're misgendered or until someone uses the wrong pronouns for us. I, like I said, use she, her pronouns. I am very masculine presenting, which we will talk about in just a second. And so people often think that my pronouns are he, him, but they are not. And I'm often misgendered. And I have to, kindly remind people that I use she, her pronouns. So with pronouns, I really want you to know that these pronouns are life-saving. And I say that because the Trevor Project found that transgender non-binary youth who report having their pronouns respected by all or most of the people in their lives attempted suicide at half the rate of those who did not have their pronouns respected. We also know that Russell et al. Found that compared with peers who could not use their chosen name in any context, young people who could use their chosen name at school, home, work, and with friends experienced 71% fewer symptoms of severe depression and 34% decrease in reported thoughts of suicide, and a 65% decrease in suicidal attempts. Now, we're talking about this, and I've mentioned what it feels like to be misgendered. Now, I'm an adult and I tell you that it's harmful to me. We're talking about children who are saying, this is suicide prevention. Really important that you see, this is the SHARP survey from Utah schools. So the SHARP survey comes from grades 6, 8, 10, and 12. And it goes over a variety of different aspects, but I always focus on our depression and suicide related indicators because it's important to know where our students are at. And we just talked about how important pronoun use is for suicide prevention. Well, when we talk about suicide in our schools and what our students are experiencing, we saw that, you know, if you look at these charts, and we're just talking about felt sad or hopeless for the past, or for 2 weeks or more in a row during the past year. If you look at the numbers, our heterosexual youth are feeling sad or hopeless for 2 weeks at 27.7% in 2019. It went up a little in 2021 to 29.9. But let's talk about our gay, lesbian students and our bisexual students. Those numbers are much higher. We're sitting at 62.2%, jumping to 68%. Bisexual students jumped from 68% to 71%. Other students on this is individuals who are not sure of their sexual orientation, or who are still trying to figure out where they are. So they're still questioning, and questioning means they're just trying to find their identities. Transgender and cisgender students, you see those leaps. Unfortunately, in 2021, we did not have enough students that filled out the SHARP survey to report on the last 2 years of their mental health levels. So you'll see that we only have the levels, but you can see the 21.4% for cisgender individuals to 68.8% for transgender individuals. And I again want to remind you, these are our students in our schools here in Utah. This is not a national statistic. This is a statistic coming out of from our children writing these, filling out these forms. We then moved to seriously considered suicide in the past year. Heterosexual students went down in 2021 to 14.4% from 15.3. Gay and lesbian went up to 48.3%. That's almost half. We have over half for bisexual. It did go down a little bit in 2021 for bisexual students, but that's still above half. And then other students went up about 2% in 2021. And then again, we don't have the suicide and depression rates for our transgender and cisgender students. So in comparison. So again, we're talking about this because this inclusive practices are going to be life-saving. Using pronouns is life-saving. So then we jump in after, you know, gender identity and our pronoun use. We talk about gender expression and what you present on the outside. These are your clothes. And I mentioned that I'm very masculine presenting, but I also identify as gender non-conforming. My gender expression is not traditional. I am a very, very masculine woman. If you see me outside, out of a tie, that is shocking. It does not happen very often. I love my ties. I love presenting this way. Someone who might be, you know, a feminine man is another example of gender nonconforming. And so feminine presenting, masculine presenting. Think of the traditional department stores. You know, masculine presenting is the men's department, feminine presenting is the women's department. Then we bring in androgynous. And this is someone where you can't distinguish if they're masculine or feminine. So here's how that can be broken down. You can either be, you know, where your clothes, you just can't tell if they're feminine or masculine, or it can be a blend. So for example, if I was to show up in a tie and a dress shirt and then a skirt, that's an androgynous look because it's a combination of both. And these are items that can be something that can change throughout the day. Okay, our clothes can change throughout the day. So my partner is extremely feminine. She goes to work, she's wearing skirts and dresses and all kinds of attire. And when she gets home, she jumps into a pair of basketball shorts or sweats. So, you know, she swapped her gender expression depending on where she's at. Another way that we can think about our gender expression is through actions. And I'm going to give just one example tonight. I often give many, but I love to give this one because people just don't expect it. So when I'm driving to work, I have a work playlist on my Spotify. And when I am sitting in my car, I sing to myself at like the top of my lungs. And I often sing, and it is like in my top 3, not even kidding. I often sing Kesha and Macklemore. And when I'm singing Kesha, I'm hitting all the high notes and I am as feminine presenting as you can imagine. When I start singing Macklemore, my voice lowers, I get masculine. And in 3.5 minutes, I switch from masculine, feminine, because of a song. So that's another way that it can change throughout the day and the way we express our gender. Now, when we take our gender and we perform it very hyper masculine or hyper feminine, we become drag kings or drag queens. So a drag king, someone who's hyper masculine, I like to always use the example of a lumberjack. That just seems to be very hyper masculine, you know, the beard, the chest hair, the axe, the flannel, although some of us might know that flannel belongs in another community, but hey, so drag queens, hyper feminine, could be someone very dressed up like our image here of Justin Bond of Drag Syndrome in London. So Justin is very feminine presenting here with a dress and lots of jewelry and presenting hyper feminine. All right, so then we move to sexual orientation. And this is attraction based on your gender. And I'm going to break these words up because when I present here in just a second, but a couple slides, it's going to be really quick and easy because you're going to know the terms. So when we use homosexual, this is someone who's attracted to members of the same sex or gender. So homo, broken up, same, homo, same. Heterosexual, attracted to members of the opposite sex or gender. So hetero for opposite. Lesbian, women who are primarily attracted to other women. Gay is often men who are attracted to other men, but it's an umbrella term that we often use in our community as to say, I'm attracted to individuals of the same gender. I use I'm gay sometimes. Back in the 90s when Ellen DeGeneres came out, her magazine cover said, I'm gay. So it's kind of a term that we use often. Bisexual, I want you to remember bi for two. Now, this is a person who is attracted to members of two gender identities. So if I was to tell you, one example could be that if I was attracted to women and non-binary folks, there are two identities, two, bisexual. Pansexual, I want you to take pan and think of all. That's a person who experiences attraction for all gender identities and orientations and expressions, just all, okay? The word queer is an umbrella term to describe individuals who don't identify as straight or cisgender. So the word queer also has a negative connotation attached to it. It was used to harm our community. We recently, in the last few years, have really started to reclaim the word queer and use it. And the reason for that is because if you've heard, I've already broken up a few identities for you. If I was to tell you my gender identity, my sex assigned at birth, my sexual orientation, my attractions, if I kept going, we could be here for a little while because we know there's multiple identities to human beings. And it's kind of really easy for me to just say, hey, I'm queer. And you know that I belong into the community because I don't identify as straight or cisgender. The one thing that I always like to teach is if you yourself want to use the word queer, I often tell you, check with the individuals you are with. See if they are comfortable with you using the word. They may tell you yes. They may tell you no. They may tell you why. They may not tell you why. It's all individual preference, but just please respect what they're telling you on using that word. So here's why we broke that up to make it a little easier. I just gave you sexual orientation. So in light gray on your screen, you will see individuals who are sexual. You have a sexual orientation. If you go to the other end of this spectrum, remember that asexual, and that means a person who does not have any sexual attraction. In that lines, we go down and we find someone who is gray A. That's an individual who is somewhere in between asexual or sexual. They're not all the way sexual. They're not all the way asexual. They're somewhere in between. And then we have folks here who are demisexual. And this is someone who does not have to experience sexual attraction without an emotional connection. And it has to be a strong emotional connection. So you really have to connect with someone before you can have any sexual attraction. So we have those sexualities, and that's one orientation, okay? Then we have a romantic orientation that has nothing to do with sexual orientation or sex. So I broke these words up to make it really easy for us, right? Heteroromantic, hetero for opposite sex or gender. So you have a romantic orientation for someone of the opposite sex or gender. Homoromantic, you have a romantic orientation for someone of homo, same sex or gender. Biromantic, bi for two. We know that you have attraction to two sexes or genders in a romantic way. Panromantic, pan for all. So you have a romantic orientation for all gender identities, orientations. And aro, remember A for no. So aromantic has no romantic orientation. So now let's break this up. If you can have a sexual orientation and a romantic orientation, they're two separate. You could have them not correlate. So I identify as a lesbian. I have a sexual orientation, but I could have a romantic orientation with, again, I'll use women and non-binary folks. So I could have my romantic orientation as bi-romantic. And you can have, of course, any of these. You can have someone who's asexual and have no sexual orientation whatsoever, but also be able to have a romantic orientation with someone who they're heteroromantic. So they can have a romantic relationship with someone without having a sexual relationship with someone. So when you look at this, I always try to tell people, look at the lines, see where you might, fit. Because a lot of people think they only have a sexual orientation. But I like to tell people to challenge themselves and look at what their romantic orientation may be. Which brings us to the letters. So L, lesbian, G, gay, B, bisexual, T, transgender, Q is for queer or questioning. A reminder that questioning is someone who may not know what their identity is or what they want to identify as yet. They're still trying to see what identity fits best for them. I is intersex. A can be asexual, agender, or aromantic, A for none. And the 2S is for two-spirit. When we put the plus sign, it's to identify anyone that's not represented in those identities. These are just the extras, right? So if I don't list the P on my letters, then the plus sign covers pansexual, panromantic. So remember, the plus sign adds to everyone's who's not represented on that list. Now, I mentioned we use a lot of different ways to explain all of the letters to everyone, depending on the research. I'm often asked, what's the best way to identify the community? And there is a general consensus that as allies, as individuals talking about the community, wherever you are, the best way to identify the community right now is LGBTQ+. Now, it's depending on your own inclusion, but to make sure that you do start with LGBTQ+, we want to ensure the Q's on there. A lot of people still refer to it as LGBT+. They might just say the LGBT, but saying LGBTQ+. And you are more than welcome to use the IA2S as long as you know what those identities mean and you feel comfortable explaining them to others. Do make sure that you're being respectful when describing those, because many people will ask you what they mean. And rather than referring to a community that you don't quite understand, make sure you're using the letters you do understand. All right, I'll pass it right back over to Dr. Polychronis.
Thanks. So now that you have a good primer for how this now applies and intersects within the disability community, I want to share with you some interesting numbers that came out from the Movement Advancement Project. And each of these, we have a resource slide at the end. So if you want any of the resources we're talking about or the studies that we're talking about, we put them on the individual slides, but they're at the end as well. So some of these numbers are pretty stark, and Amanda did cover many of them, but putting them together, I think, is really important. So within the intersectionality, topic, right? We are estimating that there is approximately 3 to 5 million people globally that identify as both the LGBTQIA plus and disabled communities. And we'll talk here in just a minute again about language, just like Amanda has done with the LGBTQ plus communities and how all the letters are changed depending on the topics. The disability community is that. I myself, when I'm presenting professionally, talk with person first language. However, the self-advocates have really made a big jump in the water with saying, hey, I identify as autistic and disabled. And when you use person first language in front of me, I am offended by that. So what I'm finding now after almost 25 years in the field, I am constantly code switching the language I'm using depending on my audience. And so because of the multitude of folks represented here tonight, I'm going to code switch a little bit through the presentation. Please know it's not a mistake. It's more so trying to respect the different identities folks carry within even this audience tonight. So that number, by the way, 3 to 5 million, is a very conservative estimate. There are thoughts still where some of our older populations have not had conversations around this. They're not comfortable talking about it. They weren't asked. So the number is likely much, much higher. Within the general population, about 27.2% report having a disability. However, once we move into the LGBTQIA plus communities, all of a sudden we jump. In some areas, almost double, right? Bisexual men, 40% are identifying as also having a disability, and same with transgendered adults completely. Lesbian and bisexual women, around 36% identify as having a disability, and 26% of gay men report having a disability. So once again, comparing that to the general population, you can see it's higher in the LGBTQ communities, and we'll talk about why that might be here in just a minute. One of the most interesting pieces of research that has garnered a lot of attention, at least in my academic arena, is the numbers related to autism and the trans and non-binary communities. For example, 14% of transgender or non-binary adults are also autistic. Again, this is a language self-advocates are using here, compared to 4% of the general population. There are all sorts of thoughts about why that is, be it genetics, be it environmental, be it the way that they might be more tolerant to nonconformity. But that is currently being studied in lots of arenas. But just again, compare those numbers, 14% of the trans and non-binary community. The other thing that is so fascinating to me is that adults there's now more of a commonality. I mean, I'm a teacher, right? I taught in Jordan School District for years. I have been training teachers at higher ed for now almost 20 years. This is the first time we're starting to see adults in the community start self-diagnosing disability and that being somewhat acceptable, maybe not for services, right? And again, this is where I'm toggling. It wouldn't be recognized in the school system, for example. But within the adult population, we're seeing a lot more self-diagnoses, and we're starting to see services coming around like, look, we can provide spaces for you that are respectful of sensory issues, right? We can create a room. We can have a place at the airport so you can get away from the hustle and bustle. You don't have to show us documentation. So we're starting to see more and more of that. So this gets into the potentially higher category of it's a possible, in addition to that 14%, there's probably another up to 28% that have not yet been diagnosed, but identify and display autistic characteristics. So the numbers are pretty interesting. And certainly in my personal experience, it is starting to show up more, if that makes sense. Back when I started teaching, I did not very often had students that even disclosed they were within the LGBTQ community. And then that became more and more comfortable. And within the last 5 years, I would say that I'm seeing more and more folks identifying as non-binary or trans. And within the last 2 years, I'm seeing folks identify as non-binary and autistic coming through college. And so we're starting to see now that language applies, people are becoming more comfortable or having more access to information and able to identify. Amanda, would you flip to the next slide for me? So really quickly, one of the reasons Amanda and I work together, besides the fact that we go back a ways and love spending time together, besides that, there are so many commonalities between these two communities. I will be the first to say I do not belong to either community. I do not have a disability, nor do I identify within the LGBTQ community. However, I do consider myself an ally to both and a champion of causes to both as well. And as time has gone on, I have recognized how significant the overlap is between the two communities. And I'll talk about that here in just a minute. But as a general view, they both experience extreme discrimination, rejection, bullying, violence. There are massive amounts of assumptions placed upon them, including that their identity is an error and that there's something to be fixed. All right, next slide. So we're going to go into maybe some not so pretty things to talk about. And I apologize because I know as a parent, these kinds of topics were really hard for me to listen to, recognizing that my son was at higher risk for suicide because of his disability, because of bullying. I know this is hard to hear. It's still hard for me to talk about it. My son is now almost 20. But we need to have honest conversations as parents and as educators and as community members about what our students are really experiencing. Things have gotten so political that sometimes we're not really giving the proper room to have conversations that make people feel like they are okay with who they are, that we're okay with who they are, that the school is okay with them being there. We're not having those conversations, and we're seeing some really big impacts. So the most recent data that came out from the National Crime Victimization Survey, by the way, this is through the US Bureau of Justice Statistics, was 2016. They just recently did another survey that is being compiled, but this is the most recent data. What they have found is that usually within the intersectional identity specifically, this report looked at disability in the LGBTQ intersection, that when somebody identifies as being in both communities, they also report feeling excluded from both. This is one of the things that Amanda and I work together a lot on, again, is so that when individuals go to the Pride events, they can access spaces, they can use wheelchairs, they can hear the presenters or access information. They have spaces that are maybe less sensory stimulating. But again, a lot of folks in the disability community feel like they can't also, identify within the LGBTQIA, that would not be acceptable, and vice versa. Within the LGBTQ community, there's still a lot of shame with being diagnosed with a disability. So rejection is a very common theme for both. Discrimination. These folks are constantly living with, even though there's legal protections for them, they are constantly living with those challenges of their identities at school, at work, within the healthcare system, in the community. There's reports about how police and ambulance services respond in an emergency. There's so many conversations around the experiences that people have within discrimination, and they're both the same for these communities. The bullying statistic is sobering. At least 1 in 4 are reporting, and keep in mind, bullying is often underreported because it's embarrassing. But students who are LGBTQIA2S+, and also report having a disability, they have reported that they are bullied based on their disability alone, right? So that's 1 in 4. So they become really prime targets. Again, as parents, most of us know our kids are often the butt of jokes, or even if they're popular kids, the language that gets thrown out that hurts our children. I mean, my son was not necessarily bullied, or at least he did not share that with me. But the language that was thrown out every time somebody rejected something, they didn't like something, they were angry about something, the language about this is so bad, this is so, idiotic, moronic, all of those things that hurt him at a level because he knew he struggled with reading and communicating. So bullying, and that's not even identified under bullying. So again, 1 in 4 is saying I'm bullied because I have a disability and I'm in the LGBTQ community. The statistics around violence, it just stops me in my tracks. I mean, for folks that identify as having a disability, they are 2 times higher at rate of being at risk to violence in the community. And this is violent, intimate partner violence. This is just being out in the community and being harassed physically and violently. Within the LGBTQ community, it's 4 times higher. So folks that have those intersectional identities are even higher than that. So once again, having these identities is quite something to carry, and it's not because of those identities alone, it's because the way society is responding to those identities. And again, I think that those of us that are parents see this in our kids coming home and crying and being made fun of and feeling like they didn't get invited, or feeling like the odd kid out, or having humor that is different than others. It takes an emotional toll on them and us for being part of that. Next slide, please. So this one, I have shared these statistics. I update them all the time, but Cantor Media puts this out. They monitor social media for all sorts of things, not just this stuff. This is the stuff I pulled, right? But they monitor for what we're shopping. Like, I don't know if you were watching the news today, but did you know Utah, like, we're the top purchasers of Legos in the world, right? Who knew that? I don't know. I own a lot of sets of Legos. But they collect all sorts of data. But one of the things that they collect is around how many things in social media occur that's ableistic, right? And even check your own social media. I have to keep myself in check for not saying words that are hurtful to communities. So 7 in every 10, 70% of them are negative towards people with intellectual disabilities. So my license is in what we call now extensive support needs. We have historically called it severe disability. This is that population, right? 70% of everything that gets thrown out in social media has terms like idiot or moron or you are stupid, right? Those terms are in 70% of what's online. So if our kids are accessing online material, which we know they are commonly exposed all day long. Slurs, so that's just ableism, right? Which is bad enough. Slurs is 6 in every 10 posts contain an ableistic slur. So we get into terms like the R word that we've removed from vocabulary. This is another overlap with the LGBTQ community. We have slurs within these communities that are used to hurt and damage. The LGBTQ community has reclaimed some of the words. The disability community has reclaimed some as well, such as CRIP and disabled, and there's others. They do not reclaim the word retarded, and that is a word that we do not use anywhere. It is considered a pretty massive slur. The impact is that only 15% of LGBTQ teens with a disability report that they feel safe in the classroom. That means 85% of students that identify in those 2 communities are going to school feeling unsafe, feeling as though they will be bullied and targeted and hurt for being in that space. 85% feel that way. Now, that is compared to the already low rate of only 31% of teens that 31% of teens without a disability that are LGBTQ. 31 is too high, but that's on top of that. So the impact is significant, and it is all around them. It is in our home environments. It's on commercials. I challenge you to find ads for Black Friday and Cyber Monday that don't have the term crazy low deal, right? I mean, it is all over the media, and some people are more sensitive to it than others. I get that. It's still problematic. The outcomes is that there's higher rates of depression in these communities. Absenteeism, if 85% of the student body is that are in these populations are feeling not safe, we know their absentee rate will be higher. Loneliness, and we know the impact on lower academic achievement. So then there's that double impact. Is this disability, or is this the impact of ableism around them? Next slide. So here's some harmful assumptions. And again, these are things that overlap both communities. There's this extreme thinking within both communities. On one hand, it is common. I'm going to say it is common. I'm not going to say, we all think this way, or I don't think this way, right? I mean, I've had many years now to learn about what my own biases are and challenge those and work through them. There is a very common misconception that kids with disabilities, adults with disabilities, are presumed to not have any interest in sex, that they're asexual or just disinterested, or we have bought into that whole developmental level of a 2 or 3 year old and said, oh, well, they're 2 or 3. Let's buy them 2 or 3 year old toys. Let's treat them as though they're 2 or 3, and 2 and 3 year olds have no interest in sex. It's not the right way to come across developmentally. Sexuality is quite different. To all of us who have been teachers, we can tell you your kids are sexual, and we see it in the way that they may have sexual experiences in class that we treat as behavioral error, right? So we send them into the bathroom, or we stop, self-stimming kinds of behaviors. But the reality is that is an error on our side for thinking they don't have interest in sex as a general community. On the flip side, we also, whether we recognize it or not, it is very common for people to feel that the LGBTQIA community is over-sexualized, that the minute a child tells us that they are gay, that means they want to go out and have a partner and have, just explore. And it's one or the other, right? For these communities, there's no gray area, there's no development, there's no age appropriate topic. It's just you have it or you don't, and it's all or it's nothing. Those are very common belief systems within the communities. There's also another presumption within our community of disability specifically that our kids, right? And me as a parent, we assume our kids, of course, are heterosexual and cisgender. I mean, maybe we don't even think about it. Maybe we just assume that without even realizing we're assuming. And that's why we're so surprised when kids come out, or that's why we act like we should be sad about this. Like we've assumed these things. The other thing is around errors, right? I want to be really, really clear. Although there's a lot of overlap, a disability does not cause confusion around gender identity, expression, and attraction. So a few slides ago, you saw a young person that is dressed up as a drag queen. That is not because he has Down syndrome and therefore is confused by how he is expressing himself. There's not confusion. And on the flip side, LGBTQIA identity is not a disability. And I'm going to say this over and over because I want to be really, really clear. There are pieces that we're going to talk about with protections and why there's this intersectionality, but that does not in any way mean that LGBTQ is itself a disability. Okay. The other issue that we have when we assume something is wrong, and I've come at this as a parent, I've come at this as a teacher, I've even come at this as an academic. I see what we call behavioral errors, right? And I'm like, all right, well, I could do a task analysis and fix that, right? You just need the right reinforcement system and prompting. But what message that sends when we're doing at home and school in the community is that you're not okay how you are right now. We've got to fix it. There's always something you can do better. And this concept of wrongness or brokenness or not quite up to being included in a classroom, being included in a community, being included in a religion, those exclusions often have led to harmful and even deadly treatments. And we see this all the time in history. It happens even today with some of the treatments that we've done, well-meaning sometimes, but there's still electric shock therapy that happens in one of the treatment centers on the East Coast. So this concept of fixing has been really problematic. And it's also led to this idea. I've taught this idea, for the record. I am not innocent of this. I learned it and I've repeated it and I'm challenging it now. This idea that we should mourn the child that we thought we were going to get, that we thought we had, that we're on a different journey than we assumed. These can be really harmful to kids, right? That whole idea of mourning the fact I thought I had a daughter, but that's okay, I have a son. Those things can send really, really damaging messages to kids. And next slide, Amanda. So I again want to reiterate, LGBTQIA2S+ identity is not a disability. Okay. With that said, ADA can be applied to individuals who also have mental health disorders that require accommodations in public spaces. So for all the reasons we've talked about, this idea of exclusion and bullying and violence and all of these other things that can lead to anxiety disorders, that can lead to mental health issues. Because of that, ADA protections can indeed come through, and we see in schools, accommodations can be included in IEPs, 504 plans for things like anxiety related to activities like dressing for PE or restroom use. So they can, in fact, be applied. It again does not mean that the LGBTQIA2S+ identity is a disability. It means that there are maybe some secondary disabilities that have accumulated over time. If you want more information, I included the law and the federal standard. It is also on the resource slides as well. All right, next slide. Couple other protections to think about, and for teachers on the call and also parents, I think we need to know these things. This can come back as a useful tool. FAPE, there's been a lot of challenges to these laws, and it has held up over time that a free and appropriate public education, one of the central tenets to IDEA, right, protects students from bullying. And that extensive bullying is a violation of FAPE, which then puts the schools at risk for additional services that might need to be provided. They can be sued. Schools are being very careful with bullying because of these issues. And we've seen one in the news recently that has a really traumatic outcome. So FAPE is indeed in play when it comes to bullying. Title IX also comes into play when there is harassment or punishment for failing to conform to sex-based stereotypes. So this could be a school not allowing a student to dress as they choose based on their identity. It could come into play by, again, the harassment and bullying from students or teachers and other staff members. So there are additional protections. So we have 504s, we have IEPs, we have FAPE, we have Title IX that cover these protections. But again, that is family members and advocates really having to push that bar because these students experience this in all their lives. So again, these protections are amazing. We're very grateful for ADA and IDEA and Title IX, but there comes to be a point in which the battle is a long, hard fought one. All right, next slide. So we're going to talk for just a minute about journeys and destinations, as well as unique struggles. And again, as a parent, I put myself in this category. I am constantly, especially now that my son is an adult, I'm constantly trying to remind myself to pull back, let him make mistakes, teach him things, self-determination, all of those kinds of things, but recognize where my place is as a parent. This can be really hard because I was his ally for so long. And it's such a fine line to figure out when our advocacy for them becomes detrimental to them, when we're taking over, when we're using our voice to speak over the top of theirs. That's a red flag. So one of the things we're going to talk about is, let's make sure that the attention that we spend on these issues really is focused on them and not our journeys, but theirs. And also that there's some unique struggles that we're going to talk about, but specifically around being cared for in all the spaces they are in. All right, next slide. So once again, I'm saying this as a parent to other parents and also as an educator to other educators. This is about our kids' journey, right? This is about their journey. Our journey might be a separate one. I might have to take a totally different journey to get to the point where I can accept choices, or I can accept identity, or I can work through my biases. That's my journey. And that is not one to push off onto my kid. And that is one of the things that I think we're struggling with right now in society, but it's causing a lot of harm to kids. All right, next slide. This is a great book for anybody who wants to know more. You don't have to believe me. You can read about it from other people that are versed in research around this, but also that write or experience it. Andrew Solomon is a primary author who also identifies within both communities and talks a lot. The book is fascinating. He broke it up into chapters, and each chapter is a different identity. And he talks about apples not falling far from the tree. And then he goes on to say, except for when they do, right? So for example, most of the time, if I grew up in poverty, right? And I would go into school and I would see my friends with things, and I would mask and I would hide the fact that I may not have eaten. I didn't have, clean clothes. I may have masked some of that to the best of my ability, right? And it was exhausting to keep that up. And then coming back home, though, that my family all experienced that. Like, you could let down your guard a little bit. You knew we could laugh about the things we didn't have. We could enjoy each other's company, and that was fine. And we see that a lot around identities such as race, religion, where maybe somebody goes into school, their religion is not respected in that space, but they come home and they get to celebrate the religion together and know that they're together in the same space, experiencing the same things, and there's a lot of love there. But on the flip side, there are a couple identities that don't get that. And it's ones that are around when they don't share the identity of the people that they live with. So specifically the LGBTQ community and the disability community, they're often the only member within their family that experiences those identities. And so in some spaces, families go out of their way to make them feel loved. We'll give you some tips on what you can make sure you're doing, and how it's nothing outside of just being good parents that you're probably already doing. But at the same time, it helps to hear, like, great, I'm doing these things and I've got to be careful that I don't do these other things. So the big thing, difference can become overwhelming when there's no reprieve from feeling undervalued. So kid that's going to school and they're excluded from the general ed curriculum all day long, they're bullied by their peers in the lunchroom, and then they come home to feel like they might be a burden on their family because they hear people fighting over expenses or time or whatever, right? There's no reprieve from that for a lot of people. When leaving unwelcoming spaces only to go into yet another space. So it can be leaving from work, where there's issues with people picking on you or not being able to get a raise because you struggle with social skills, and then going home and struggling with a partner. When there's no opportunity to talk about experiences and feelings, that idea of being closeted is exhausting. And if you're closeted in all your spaces, it's exhausting and overwhelming. when all interactions are to fix. And this is one thing I'm guilty of as a parent, because I am a trained educator, I'm a researcher, and my kid would come home from school and I'm like, great, I can fix that. Sit down at the table, let's do this, right? And it was a really hard conversation when he told me, Mom, I hate when you do that. I don't, can I just be your kid, right? So, sorry, I get emotional about that. It really is impactful. And then finally, this idea that when difference is felt in all spaces, there's no similarities, right? That you are the only one of that identity, or you think you're the only one because it's not encouraged for you to have online spaces or group spaces. When that is not happening anywhere, especially if there's threats to safety at home, at school, in the community, on your buses, in after care programs, all of those kinds of things, all of a sudden that difference becomes incredibly overwhelming. All right, next slide. All right, Amanda, you're up.
Thanks, Shambi. All right, so we're going to talk about the Family Acceptance Project, and this research comes out of San Francisco and Dr. Caitlin Ryan. And what I'm going to share with you today is a few of the accepting behaviors that you can do to help your LGBTQIA+ kids. This helps with really diving into ways that will reduce risks like depression, suicide, drug use. And it's going to lift up your children's self-esteem, their health, and well-being. So to talk through some of those, and it's really important to know this is available at familyproject.sfsu.edu. And these are posters where you can get all 50 of these behaviors in multiple languages. I want to share that. I think this is an amazing resource, and I would love for you to go there and download some of these posters in different languages. So let's talk about that. So the first thing you can do is talk with your child or your foster child about their LGBTQ identity and listen respectfully. You know, this is something whenever I come out, even as an adult, I can tell you it is so hard. It's still hard. I do this on a daily basis. I teach this on a daily basis, and it's still hard to come out. When your child comes out to you, if you listen and you talk to them and you say, what does that mean to you? You know, tell me what that identity means to you. Tell me what this looks like. That right there could be the most beautiful conversation you could ever have with your child. I know that I do this with my kids that come to the Pride Center so much. I sit down and I say, okay, so you identify as asexual. Can you tell me what that means to you? And I listen. And they find that I'm someone that will listen to them and talk to them. And I tell you, as someone that wishes I had just a ton of individuals that would have asked me this as a child, I would have came out so much earlier. I would have found my true authentic self so much earlier. You know, once you start talking about these identities, make sure to tell your children that you love them. It's that simple. We want to feel loved. We want to feel accepted. So to continually remind us, you know, I love you. It might sound, you know, you might not agree with these identities. You might not, you know, be able to because of societal factors. There might be things that you worry about, but your love for your child never changes. And to be able to continue to tell your child, I love you, will be life-saving. We need to hear love. You know, there's ways to support your child's gender expression. I was back in the day, the term was tomboy. I was just this little tomboy running around with short hair and in my little masculine clothes. And, you know, there were times I heard my mom say things like, well, we need to put her in a dress. She can't dress like a boy. I was reminded often that that was not okay. And it was hard on me. I myself had mental health issues. I'm a survivor of suicide attempts. And all of these things could have halted those positions. So support your child. If your child, your little boy wants to throw on a dress and wants to paint their nails and wants to express in a feminine way, go buy that dress. This is the stuff that will save your kids' lives. I'm telling you this wholeheartedly with someone that works with these kids day in and day out. I see it nonstop. I just wish my mom would let me buy a dress. I just wish I could get a tie. There's so many factors that our kids say. Once we talk, love, and support our child, we have to protect them in society, right? We do have to require that other family members treat your child with respect. If your child decides to go by a different name, you need to reassure your family members to call them that name and their pronouns. Because misgendering, we saw in the talk earlier, misgendering and, you know, maybe using their dead names. A dead name is a name that they were born with. They usually, you know, release that name and it's now dead to them. That can help your child see that, one, you accept and you respect their identity, but that you expect other people to respect and accept their identity. So doing this, you can use your child's chosen name and pronouns. I cannot tell you the joy our kids feel when you say, you know, if they changed their name and they came and told me their name, and I talked to them and I introduced them to the group and I'm like, hey, this is Jackson. Jackson uses he, him pronouns. And then a kid later on goes, hey, Jackson, how are you doing? The smile, the beam, the way that children love to feel accepted and find their true authentic selves is one of the most beautiful things you will ever experience. So use them. And then speak openly about your child's LGBTQ plus identity. Stand up for when others mistreat them for their identity. Be their advocate. You're their parents, you're their caregivers. Like, they're still our children. They don't need to protect themselves. It's hard enough to just come to acceptance of who you are. Make sure if someone's mistreating them, that you as the adult step up and say, my child uses this pronoun. I am so proud of you for being part of this community. I am so proud of you for finding your true authentic self. That right there is accepting behaviors that shows them love and acceptance. And we truly, truly hope that you can join this journey in making sure your kids find their true authentic selves. Shambi, we're gonna switch back over and have you go over Project Thrive's resource.
Okay, this one's a really great one. Again, this is coming from a multitude collaboration of pretty big names. NEA, if you're a teacher, that's a big one. The Human Rights Campaign, the National Association of School Psychologists, and the National Center for Lesbian Rights. So this resource is about advocating for LGBTQ students with disabilities, and it provides parents and guardians an overview of the rights as well as actionable recommendations on how you can support students in the K-12 system. There's a blueprint for developing strong IEPs and 504s for LGBTQ students with disabilities. Next slide. Again, this resource will be available with a link at the end as well. We pulled out the main ideas of the document. Of course, the document will go into great detail on all of these, but very similar to what Amanda's saying is supporting students, LGBTQIA plus students with disabilities, respecting their sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and protecting them from bullies. We have seen failure from that to happen twice in the last couple of weeks here locally, at least twice, right, reported. So we have to protect them from bullying. Advocating. Again, teachers, if you're watching this, we can change school systems to capture pronouns and chosen names, secure bathroom access. These are things that are available to them, that's legally protected. We as teachers can advocate that we hold up those options for them. Value, encouraging student input, asking their opinion on things, working with them to develop self-advocacy skills. This, as we know as parents of children with disabilities, we know that self-advocacy is a prime marker for post-school outcomes of success. Same thing is true right now. We've got to teach them early on and then step back. And that is the hardest thing I've done as a parent. And I'm still working on it. Implementing positive behavior supports and restorative justice approaches in schools. This is huge. We've been talking about positive behavior supports in schools for a very long time at this point in time. We still have issues with it. We constantly seem to go back to very disciplinary methods of reaction, but we know that causes harm and injury to students. We need to also be considerate of the overrepresentation of these two populations in our discipline and expulsion numbers. We should be paying very close attention to who is getting disciplined and who is being expelled from schools. We can provide additional supports through the IEP process, and that whole page that talks about supplementary aids and services that support students with gen ed curriculum and needed accommodations. These topics help both communities and those within the intersectionality identities. Next slide. So this is where we can create, right? So that was just kind of like holding up what already exists. This is where we have opportunities to create things. We can establish anti-bullying and non-discrimination policies as we get into spaces, be it the community, be it in our workspaces, be it in even our religious spaces. What's our policies around these things? We can adopt policies and procedures that specifically support transgender and non-binary students. We can implement inclusive dress codes that support diversity of expression. We can provide comprehensive professional development for all staff on creating inclusive spaces. We can develop inclusive criteria in school climate, and we can support groups for secondary students at the middle and high school levels. We have all sorts of clubs that can be started, like the Gay Straight Alliance, the GSAs. Next slide. Big topic that, again, we want to talk about. I am a huge advocate for inclusion, and it's not because it's just a catchy thing to say. It's not because it's an easy thing to do. It definitely is not that. It's because it's a right thing to do, and it's because that we know the detrimental impact long-term. The research has been clear on this since the 80s. What happens when we segregate students based on their identity, based on their disability, based on their LGBTQ status? When we segregate, we change what they have available to them. And we have fought this battle many, many times. There's documentaries, there's laws, there's protections. All of these things exist for a reason. So we can promote inclusion through accommodations like restrooms, mental health, absence policies. We can teach self-advocacy skills to students and parents, and welcoming spaces. How things are represented in a classroom matters. The idea that we do put sexualized items in classrooms all the time. So despite what's on constantly in the news of removal of books and removal of posters, it's only removing them from some communities. For some reason, straight families are still very much honored as books and as posters and as flashcards, as we're talking about pronouns. The rules are not applied equally, and it's really important to recognize that we are not applying the rules across the board. So representation, equity, and safety are essential in promoting inclusion. Next slide. This quote is really near and dear to my heart, particularly, again, as an inclusion advocate. I can say this, I completely agree with George Day. And this is that inclusion is not about bringing people into spaces that already exist. That's retrofitting, and it's hard, and it doesn't work. And it's like cramming a square peg into a circle, right? But it's about making new spaces, and it's about making a better space that works for everyone. Next slide. All right, I'm looking at time. Amanda, what you thinking? Want to jump to Q&A, or do we have a minute? We want to have them fill out a quick touch point?
I think we should have them just think about this for right now and open up to questions, since we do have that song video that UPC wants to put on. So just really asking the audience today to think of how you can promote inclusion in your spaces. And we do have on the next slide our information. If you wanted more conversations around how you yourself can make your spaces inclusive, we have our emails. Please email us, let us know ways that we can help you. We're always here. I would say if you have questions around disability, do reach out to Shambi. If you have questions for the LGBTQIA+ inclusion, reach out to me. But we can also connect you with multiple, conversations, but we just want to make sure you're kind of going to the specialists there. You're welcome to either ask questions in the chat or do them on this Slido. Either one that you prefer. We did do a little example here. Make sure to push the Q&A when asking. So far, no questions in the chat. Thank you so much for being here as well. And I will keep eye on here, but please, if you have any questions, let us know. And if not, we'll just jump over to the video.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda and Dr. Polychronis. I've been really humbled and feel so grateful to you both for bringing such an important education to our community. I do want to open up the time for a Q&A. But before I am going to launch a survey that we have, because we are a nonprofit and are fully funded by grants and community donations, we do like to gather data about how we are doing as a center to provide information to our community. So I am going to launch this poll right now. If you would be so kind, it's just 7 questions to fill out this poll while we are transitioning into our Q&A session. I would really appreciate that. So that being said, there's actually something in the chat. So while the poll is being answered, I am going to go to the chat and read off a question. We do have several. Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing the who and the why with us to make sure we can help all children. But we do have a question. Can you offer guidance on supporting LGBTQ+ community in our schools with the current USBE mandate? And then it goes on to say, quote, according to the draft of the guidance, Utah law requires teachers to have parental consent to use a student's preferred name or student's preferred name or pronouns if they are different from their legal ones. But it also states that if a student has not revealed their identity to their families and could face rejection if they do, parents should not be notified. Do you have any guidance?
I absolutely do. Thanks, Christine. All right. I knew this question was coming. I knew that someone would ask this question. I want to start with the number one thing about this is that this is a guidance from the Utah State Board of Education. It is not a finalized guidance. They are still working on the draft. This is not a policy. Each district has individual policies. So the number one thing you need to do is look at your district policy and see if it aligns with this guidance. State law does, that's the way this was interpreted. We do not have exact, this is a guidance. We do not have a state law that says this is law, you must do this. So to really give you, we are watching USBE. We are watching the draft that's coming out of standards and assessments. There is a standards and an assessments. It looks like, thank you, Holly Bell, who's talking about the original draft, because the current draft did remove this interpretation of law. Thank you for sharing that in the comments. So we're watching this guidance, but the number one thing I want you to do first is look at your own district's policies. And standards and assessments is continuing to work on the draft. They meet on Friday morning. Watch for USBE board meetings. They will be discussing this on Thursday as well, along with some bullying guidance as well. So please stay tuned to board meetings if you're curious about the Utah State Board of Education and the routes that that's going. So again, let me tell you this. Pronouns save lives. The current conversation is that you are not allowed to survey students. You are not allowed to ask them their pronouns. I wear a pronoun pin everywhere I go. That shows students, youth, educators, anyone, that they can come up to me and ask me my pronouns. They can tell me their pronouns. They can use my pronouns. There are different ways you can show allyship and let students know how to share their pronouns. But do keep watching and take time to recognize, following the whole story and making sure it goes through. Because some things have been conversation and people think it's been a locked deal and they are not allowed to use pronouns, but that's not currently a policy.
Excellent. Thank you, Amanda. Holly did just share in the comments. This is the link to watch the board meeting. So there's a YouTube link on there if you're interested in finding out more information about that. And also, Holly, I apologize, I don't want to mess up your title, but just so everyone knows who Holly Bell is, she is with the Utah State Board of Education and works seriously, there's a blank going on in my head right now. So her title is, Holly, would you be okay with sharing that?
Sure. Sorry, I'm the student and family rights specialist. So the Utah Parent Center and I work very closely. I'm the Section 504 specialist. So we're able to coordinate a lot. And I appreciate you putting this webinar together and for the work that you do for students with disabilities. So I just love our relationship. Thanks for inviting me as well.
Of course. I apologize. I did not. Sometimes my mind blanks when I'm presenting. So I apologize. I didn't write that down and have that prepared. But I do appreciate you coming on and helping us with that question, because like Amanda said, we kind of had a little inkling that we would have someone be asking that question, because it has been in the news recently. So I appreciate that. I am not seeing any more questions in the chat. I do
have any questions currently on the comments. I do want to say that there was a comment that came through, but not a question. I just want to say, reach out to me if you have any specific questions for your child at this time at the Utah Pride Center. So Amanda Darrow at utahpridecenter.org, and then Shambi.polychronos at utah.edu. And I think we'll move to the video now, Christine.
Okay. Excellent. And I just want to, before I end the poll, I just wanted to remind everyone, just if you have not had that, not done the poll yet, if you would fill that out quickly. There is actually one more question, maybe. Oh, no, it was just a thank you. So thank you very much. And I'll just reiterate that from Rochelle and I. Oh, I'm sorry, we're having poll issues tonight.
Yeah, we can't see the poll, so that's okay.
Well, we did have about 62% of people that did participate. So I really do appreciate it seems like it did work for
some.
For some. So I do appreciate that. So I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll. And then Amanda, if you would be okay with stopping sharing, I can. Oh, perfect. Thank you.
So while she's pulling up this song, it's a song that we wanted to share. It's a song that was written by Jenny Brown about her son Danny. And what we loved about it is that it illustrates the beauty of just one family's journey of love and acceptance. And so we just thought we'd like to end showing you that video that she put together for us.
All right. Actually, I need to rewind it. Okay, so, oh, you know what? I gotta stop sharing for a second. Sorry. I did not click on those two little important dots. Oh, maybe I did. Okay, here we go. Let me know if you know.
I stand before you silently, not knowing what to say. You're in your world and I'm in mine, and I can see your pain. I don't pretend to know your hurt or what you have been through. Your pain is real and I can see there's nothing I can do to fix it all. You feel so small, the world seems so unfair. You feel alone, left on your own, and no one seems to care. But I wanna walk with you in the nighttime. I wanna smile with you when there's sunshine in your days. I can't make the darkness go away, but I'll stay with you till the sunrise. It may seem like the world just wishes you would go away. It's too much work to change our ways or understand your pain. You've tried so hard, you've got the scars to show you've done your best. But there's no room, or it's too soon, the world's not ready yet. But I wanna walk with you in the nighttime. I wanna smile with you when there's sunshine in your days. I can't make the darkness go away, but I'll stay with you till the sunrise. Right now it might feel like the world's closing in. You look around and sometimes can't find a friend, but I am on your side. I'm here for the ride, and I'll stay with you till the sunrise. I see you, I hear you, I'm your ally. I'm with you, I feel you, I'm right by your side. And I'll stay with you till the sunrise. I'll stay right here to the sunrise.
All right. Again, I just want to reiterate how grateful I am to Amanda and Dr. Polly Cronus for their presentations tonight. And I do encourage anyone who does have further questions to reach out to Amanda and to Dr. Polly Cronus if they have questions and concerns. And again, reach out to us at the Utah Parent Center if you do have any questions about the part that Dr. Polly Cronus presented on tonight when it comes to IEPs and 504s and the law surrounding that. Thank you again, and we will be taking the recording and finalizing it, and we'll be sending that out to all the participants as soon as we can. So, Rochelle, do you have anything else to add?
No, but thank you. Thank you so much for being here, all of you that participated, and especially to our presenters. So thank you very much.
Okay, and are you talking about the presentation as the slide or the recording to the
Talking to Barbara Smith?
Yeah.
Maybe Barbara can unmute.
I can do that, thanks. I just wanted to access some of the slides that were in the presentation about the things that we can do in families and in communities.
Okay.
Is that the part that you can send out?
Amanda?
Yeah, Dr. Polly Cronus, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, we would be happy to share the slides. So I am happy to send them to you, and then you can send them out maybe with the link to the video.
Perfect.
All right.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay.
I
Awesome.
appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Barbara. All right, if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. And thank you again for everyone that signed on and participated and took time out of your day. So thank you so much.